Hello and welcome to English Capsules. Today's capsule, Back to the Past, Part 3. Get your coffee ready and let's get started.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to tackle what's left of the past simple tense. Today we're going to focus particularly on regular versus irregular verbs.
And also we're going to discuss the auxiliaries that we need to use when making questions or negative statements.
We're going to start from the very beginning by defining what are these two types of verbs. We have in the past tense, we have two types of verbs. Ones that are called regular and ones that are called irregular. The regular verbs normally are the ones that add an ed to the end, and that's a way of showing us that this is past, like, I don't know, travel, traveled, walk, walked.
Right. They are very simple to remember, I guess, for most of us, because it's the same. You only have to add ed. The challenge here is how to pronounce that ed sound, right? So there are some verbs that are stronger, let's say, in the sounds that they have, like walk.
When we have a word that finishes with a very strong sound, the ed needs to be marked and needs to sound equally strong, like walk, walked, talk, talked.
Similar to the letter T that we were mentioning, in walked, there is letter D, which is a little bit softer, but the sound is more or less the same, right? There is a bit of air coming out. For example, played. But there is one group of verbs which is completely different because they include letters ed, and this ed has a sound like a complete syllable, like id, okay? This happens if the verb ends in t, like visit, or d, like need. So what do we have to do here? We have to say visited, needed, okay? So that's why I was saying another syllable. So these are the challenges regarding pronunciation, particularly speaking about regular verbs, right?
Another thing to bear in mind is that if you paid attention, none of the sounds sound ed, like we don't say traveled, we say traveled, right? So bear that in mind because you write it one way, but you pronounce it another way. So now let's move to the group of irregular verbs. If you have studied English in the past and you have had a book, yes, a course book, normally at the back of your book, you have a list of verbs. So the list of verbs that you have in the back of the book are what we call irregular verbs. These verbs are verbs that, in order to show that they are past, they change in some way. The thing is that it's not something regular like ed, like all the verbs have the same rule. No, each of these verbs is completely different in some way. So to place yourself in situation, normally this list has 3 columns. The first column is going to be the base form of the verb, that is the infinitive form of the verb. Then the second column is going to be the one that we use in the past simple. And the third column, we're going to leave it for another capsule. So in this case, we will have verbs like see, that becomes saw, or eat, that becomes ate. We also have other verbs that don't change in form, but they do change in pronunciation, like in the case of read, that becomes read.
These changes that we are mentioning, it can be maybe one letter, maybe half of the word, maybe the entire word, or maybe, in some other cases, no changes. Like, for example, the word put. Put is the same in the present and in the past. So this is the reason why they are considered irregular, because there's no pattern of behavior, let's say, right?
Mhm.
How do we learn these verbs? You learn them by
Not
heart.
by heart, like memorizing them, but you learn them because I don't know in your case, but in my case, my teacher always allowed us to check the list.
Mhm.
So the more you use the list, the more you're going to remember them because you see them so often that they become like part of you.
Mhm.
And I have a big thing here because it's very common in schools here in Madrid, at least,
Mhm.
that they give students exams of irregular verbs. So, like every week, you're going to have like 5 verbs, and they're going to ask you the irregular forms of these verbs. What I have seen is that this helps no one
No.
because they don't learn them because they don't have context, they are not in a sentence.
No.
There's no point in this. So, what happens is that most of the time, after a month, they forget.
I think that the best way of learning them is you can check with this list at the back of your book. Maybe there are people who are not using a book, so maybe you can start creating your own list according to the verbs that you use the most in your daily life or in the material you are using with your teacher. And you can this list that we are mentioning is in alphabetical order. But there is another way in which you can group verbs, right? You can group them according to how they behave in the list. For instance, there is a group of verbs that never change. We mentioned put. Yeah, you have put, you have cut, you have let, set. So all these verbs can be grouped together. So, of course, this is something you have to develop as a student. So, maybe you can have an appendix in your notebook for these kind of verbs, making these associations. Grouping helps a lot because it is organized and your brain likes organization. So, this is a good thing.
I was thinking that another way you can do it, if you have the list, you can also download the list from the internet. There are plenty of lists.
Yes.
So another way to do what you're saying is by color coding them. Like the ones that don't suffer any modification, you
Mhm.
underline them in one color. The one that, I don't know, they change the order of the letters, like it and et,
Yeah.
another color.
So color coding, in a way, is very similar to what I was saying because you are grouping and classifying. So that really helps.
The way these verbs behave, they behave like any other verb. Remember that these are actions that started and finished at a time in the past.
Mhm.
So I would normally say, like, I visited Argentina in 2022. So there I said visited, normal, nothing happens, nothing is
Mhm.
modified,
Right.
right? The same would happen with an irregular verb.
I went to Argentina 3 years ago. The same, more or less the same sentence. The verb changes. Visited is regular, went is irregular. End of story. Not so complicated. We have to remember something that is that we are saying affirmative sentences, and this is the only time in which the verb appears in the past form. Why am I saying this? Because when we go to the questions and when we go to negative statements, that doesn't happen. Why not? Because we have the auxiliary verbs. Did
Mhm.
appears. And when did appears, the verb needs to go in the infinitive.
Did you go to the supermarket last Saturday?
Mhm.
So I say, did you go?
You use did and you use the infinitive. The same for the negatives. If you say, I didn't go, okay, go appears. You cannot say, I didn't went. A very common mistake my students make is to say, I don't knew how to do this. Because in
wow.
Spanish it is no sabía. So sabía in Spanish is in the past. So they like implement the same form or the same thing they would say in Spanish, but in English. This happens a lot. That I don't knew, and they use don't as the auxiliary, so didn't doesn't come to their minds because it's like I already used an auxiliary. I don't need another one.
We're saying that did appears as an auxiliary, and as such, what it's doing is signaling the time. That's why we don't need to take the verb to the past tense because we already have the past given by the auxiliary. Okay?
Right. Right.
And in contrast to what we said in the was and where's capsule, the rest of the verbs don't have a negative form, right? So that's why we need the auxiliary verb to create the negative.
And this is what we meant in the previous capsule when we said verb to be versus common verbs. These are the common verbs. Verb to be doesn't appear here because you cannot mix was and were with did.
However, do notice that do can be a main verb, and as such, if you use it in an affirmative sentence, you are going to use the form did, not as an auxiliary, but as a main verb, like, yes, mom, I did my homework. So we have a game to test our audience today.
Yeah.
And this is a game based on something that we normally see, that when people don't know the verbs, they tend to invent them.
The people are very creative.
So we are going to give you a few examples of verbs, and you have to determine if the verb exists or doesn't.
Okay. So the first one that we have here is goad. I can spell it for you if you want. It is G-O-E-D. Goad.
The next one is plate. P-L-A-Y-T.
The next one is very interesting. I don't even know how to say this. I know, root. The spelling is W-R-U-T.
Okay, next we have drove. D-R-O-V-E.
Next to this one, we have another one that is made. M-A-D-E, made.
Okay, so the challenge for you this week is to determine if they exist or not. If we made mistakes, you can let us know. You can use the verb in a sentence and show us the correct way.
Okay, so before we go, remember to subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Give love to our content and spread the word to help our channel grow.
Also remember that you can rate our episodes and comment on each capsule. Activate the bell so that you know when our next capsule is out, and take a look at the description and our Instagram account to take more advantage of our content.
Okay, so that's all for today. Bye for now.
Bye.